On Saturday morning, Melissa sits down at the dining room table and she handwrites a response to every email that she receives. Every one of them. I'm very, very pleased to introduce my awesome wife of 23 years, Melissa Melendez.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I've missed doing this. Golly, it's been, I think, we were talking about it in the car right here, 6 months since I've been able to do a town hall. And I do them every month. In fact, for the past couple of years, I've been doing them twice a month. If you've never been to one of my town halls before, this is how it works. It's not a speech by me. This is supposed to be a conversation, a dialogue between me and you, because that way I can best represent you if I know how you feel about things. I took the liberty of setting aside some bills I think you would find of interest. There are a lot of bills, that go through the House, but I can't talk about them all. So I picked out the ones I thought you might find of interest. AB 3092 allows for an extension for survivors who were sexually assaulted by the doctors at UCLA. Everybody remembers that story. So it extends the amount of time that they could bring these charges forward, and I think that is appropriate, because if you know anybody who's gone through something like this, you know that oftentimes it takes a while for them to be able to come forward and open up about it. It's embarrassing, it can be humiliating, and people don't want to talk about it. And so you have to give them time to do so, and we know that from children who were sexually abused or molested. Oftentimes it's not until they're an adult that they're they have the courage to come forward and talk about it. AB 66. So we have seen, all of us in the news, this assault on law enforcement and how certain interested parties are trying to keep them from being able to do their jobs, whether that is defunding the police or rearranging how they get their funding, or setting their police station on fire and burning it to the ground. We've seen all these sorts of things. This bill would ban the use of rubber bullets, pepper gas, things like crowd dispersal types of tools that they can use that are non-lethal, which is very important, because when you have situations like we've had, obviously we want the least number of people being hurt and harmed as possible. We don't want anybody getting shot and killed, and one of the ways that law enforcement is able to do that is by the use of these types of tools. You take these tools away, the only option left for law enforcement is what? Lethal force, right? And that's what we don't want. So it almost feels like they're trying to back law enforcement into a corner to have to do these sorts of things. And I can tell you, no law enforcement officer wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to go out and shoot and kill someone today. That's just not how it works. That's the last thing that they want to do. They do not want to draw their weapon. SB 132, this bill requires corrections personnel to, when they have an inmate that is being transferred in, to ask what gender that person would like to be identified as, not what gender they are, but how do you identify today? It also allows for them to be housed in the facility for whichever gender they identify with. The next bill is SB 145. So what this means is that a 24-year-old adult can have sex with a 14-year-old child and could escape being, number one, having to be placed on the sex offender registry list, and number two, being charged with a felony. Now, there is no circumstance in which you can tell me it is ever appropriate or okay or rational or logical for an adult to be having this type of activity with a child. I have a 14-year-old child. So that bill passed and was signed by the governor. I will be introducing a bill to counter this, which will make it a felony for anyone to have sex with a child. Anyone. And I'm going to ask.
It's just horrible.
Well, this is the same author who introduced the bill, and it was signed, that says if you knowingly, purposefully give someone else HIV, you're not charged with the crime.
Really?
Knowingly, not, you didn't know you had it and you accidentally transmit. You know you have it, you go ahead and engage with someone and you don't tell them and you're not protected and you give it to them, not a crime. Assemblyman Chad Mays who was a Republican, and then left the party, and she is correct. He did get that bill over the threshold. And it's the people, I think, largely without children who think this is a great idea. Why is that? You know, so you're right. With the trafficking that takes place, and you know, this corridor, the 15 corridor, is huge for human trafficking. I mean, it's incredible. People have no idea, whether it's children, adults, it is massive. I mean, a Republican will introduce a very good bill, and then they will hold it in committee, and then Democrats will take that bill, the language of the bill, and put their own name on it, and introduce it as their own. I've had that happen to me. I mean, you know, you want the good laws to pass, but that's not exactly the way we want it to happen. But every committee is stacked so that there is a majority of Democrats on that committee. So it ensures their bills that they want them to pass will get passed. If they really hate your bill, they will do what's called double referred. They'll make you go through 2 committees. If they really, really hate your bill, you'll get 3 committees. I've had that happen too. And then the bill goes from there. But a lot of times what happens is they will just hold it in the Rules Committee, and there's nothing to keep them from doing that. The bill I had, which is SCR 93, was to end the state of emergency and strip the governor of his emergency powers so that he could no longer do the things that he's been doing, right? Like, well, we liked it too. Democrats didn't so much. But it would have taken the governor's emergency powers away to do things like shut the business down, shut schools down, and issue all of these executive orders, which, you know, are things that should have gone through the legislature and been voted on. So we wanted to take that power away from him. But they would never let the bill be heard. And I brought it up every day the last 2 weeks of session. Every day I stood up and said, you know, I want to waive this rule to have this bill brought out of committee and be voted on the floor, and they said, no, thank you. So my colleagues, Assemblyman Kevin Kiley and James Gallagher, took Gavin Newsom to court. That hearing was yesterday. The judge, she took it under submission, which means she's going to consider their arguments, she's going to review their brief, and she is expected to make a decision this Friday. We hope. So, you know, she may say, you know what, I agree with you, or she may not, because you saw what happened in Michigan, where their Supreme Court said you overstepped your boundaries big time and what you did was unconstitutional. We're hoping we get the same result in California, but it is California, and you know how things tend to not go our way in California. But the Transgender Wellness and Equity Fund, the problem with this bill was it would allow minors to go without their parents' knowledge and get treatment and drugs to facilitate changes in their body. These changes are irreversible. So imagine if, you know, that is an issue I don't know personally, but it is difficult for families to deal with, and it's hard to work through. So now imagine if the government steps in and puts up a brick wall between you and your child so that you can't talk to them, you can't get them the help they need, you can't know what's going on in their lives, and they can go to a clinic and get hormone therapy treatment or hormone replacement treatment, and you don't even know about it. I mean, certainly there's some psychological counseling that should go along with that if somebody's going to choose to do that, but this bill doesn't provide for that. So it's really getting in, it's stepping into the parental role, which is not the government's job. AB 2325, this allows a parent who's been incarcerated to have their the child support that they owed, basically the slate wiped clean. Now the argument is that if you get sent to jail or prison, well, you're not working, so how are you going to pay child support, right? So I get that. So why not make it a debt that you owe that you pay off gradually, much like you would with your credit card bill or a loan for your house or your car, because we're talking about your children and you owe it to your children. It's not their fault that you're in prison. But what they did was they said, well, that's just not fair, and it's not fair that when somebody gets out of prison that they're now in debt, that puts them further behind in being able to be successful when they reintegrate back into society. And there are consequences for what you do, and there is a way out, but you have to work hard to get out from under that debt. This just says you have no responsibility anymore to your children, to anyone. And I had a big problem with that. I understand what she was saying, the author, that you can't pay child support if you don't have any money. But I don't think that absolves you of your responsibility to your kids. And my question to the author was, well, what is the mother supposed to do? What's the mother supposed to do if she's not getting the child support? And her response was, well, there are social programs that she could take, right? And that's what I said, you mean welfare. She didn't want to say that, but that's really the only other option. So now you're punishing the mother too.
As society, because we all
Right.
pay for it.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Oh, this is a doozy. AB 3121. This bill is to put together, now that you've all read it. Yeah, I was on the committee to vote on this bill. I was the only person to vote against it. You could have heard a pin drop when I said no. Everyone went. This is a bill to put together a commission, to study how Californians are going to pay reparations.
Oh my God.
For those of you who may not be from California or aren't familiar, California was never a slave state, ever. Their argument is that while California was never a slave state, California was more than happy to participate in, they're referring to a federal law, if a slave were to escape and come to California and they were apprehended, that California would allow for them to be returned to where they came from. And they're saying that, well, that they were sympathetic to. So while we weren't a slave state, they didn't help exactly. But again, that was no one is saying that that was a bright spot in our country's history by any means. But it is hard to explain to people why, as a Californian, they will have to pay, because it'll likely be some sort of tax. They're going to have to pay for something that they had nothing to do with. They're going to do this, and the report is to be turned in by the year 2023, I believe. 3.9 million.
What's 3.9 million? What's 3.9 million?
That's the cost of this study, and that's the estimate. It'll cost more than that, guaranteed. 8 state employees. What about Native Americans? What about, right? Yeah, exactly. And they also made the argument that, we did this with Japanese Americans, which we did. That is true. The Japanese Americans who were interned during the war, afterwards, the federal government did pay them or their surviving family members. I don't remember the exact amount of money, but they were paid. But it was paid directly to the people who were affected. This is paying anyone who had anywhere in their ancestral line somebody, and I just don't know how you prove that. Oh, yes, sir.
I just want to say something, Melissa. First of all, you're one great senator.
Oh, thank you. Chris contacted me because he's at a college, and of course it's online now, and on his, where his name is, he had a little Trump sign button, whatever, just said Trump 2020. That was it. For his online class name, how people see you in there. And the teacher told him he had to remove it because it was a distraction to the class. It wasn't a political science class, by the way. And he did not remove it. And then the teacher dropped him from the class.
Here at Desert.
Yeah, because he wouldn't do it. So Chris contacted me, and now Chris is back in the class. But that's the kind of stuff that's happening. And the teacher said, came up with some silly rule that they could do it based on whatever, and I looked through the college's rules. Nothing in there indicated that you could drop someone from a class for something like that. But, he was smart enough to push back. How many other students out there just go, oh, okay. So I think we need to teach our kids to be assertive And you don't have to be aggressive, but you do have to be assertive because you do have a right to your thoughts, and you have a right to your political preference, and nobody should be stopping you. And on that happy note, thank you for having me. I'm so glad you came.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.